Hello, everybody. My name is Christian Gravius, and welcome to episode 6 of the CG Show. With me today is the man, Mr. Jim Penman. I'm sure you guys would have heard of him. If you haven't, he's the owner and founder of Jim's Group. It's the largest home service franchise in the Southern Hemisphere, which offers more than 50 services, over 3,800 franchises in 4 different countries. He's also the author of 7 different books and has 11 children. That little point interested me. So I thought I just want to rip that one out. But Jim, thank you so much. You've done it all. Jim's gardening, Jim's mowing, Jim's absolute empire. So thank you so much for joining me today. And I just really, when I came across your profile on social media, you've always, I'm sure everybody has heard of Jim's Group before. Jim's been absolutely everywhere, and I was very interested to have a conversation.
Definitely me. That is me.
You know what was funny? I've always wondered when I was growing up, is that actually Jim? And after I got in contact with you, I did the search, and I was like, that is Jim. When was that photo taken?
About 30 years ago. No, about 25 years ago.
Wow, it's mate, you still look great.
Actually, if you want to see the original photo, if you Google Jim Penman images, there's a picture of me with a beard and a hat against one of the old trailers. It's actually that picture that it comes from.
I saw it online, and that's why I was like, wow, that's a ripper photo. But how did this all begin? How did you go from just Mr. Jim? I read that you were at university and then to now, where you've literally created an absolute empire and left a massive legacy behind.
Well, it started because I always intended to be an academic. I had a theory that I developed, which you'll actually see one of my books is Biohistory or Biohistory Decline of the West, a couple of my books, which developed a theory of society, of social change, which was very, very revolutionary. And I intended to be an academic and pursue it through that field. But one of the things I discovered, I was doing a history degree, and what the implications of my theory were is that it all to do with biochemistry and to do with genetics and so forth. So I had absolutely no prospect of any kind of academic job because I wasn't a proper historian. So I knew there was some research that needed to be done. I had absolutely no money to do it. I had no relevant degree to do it. So I thought, okay, the only thing I could possibly do to make this work would be to become extremely rich, and so I can afford to pay for all the research myself. So starting off in 1982, basically flat broke, $35,000 in debt. I said, okay, somehow I've got to build. I used to mow lawns part-time as a student. I've got to turn this business, which is the only thing I knew, into something that could fund my research. And that was what it was.
Wow. So it literally started because you just wanted to fund your research. And then what happened? So you started, you're moving, you're grooving, you started making a bit of money. And then what happened? You just said to yourself, I can really turn this. It started part-time, and you said to yourself, I could really turn this into a full-time business. And then
I did. So it was part-time as a student. I used to mow lawns. And then when I realized I was completely ratted, I was no income, no nothing, I thought I'll have to do this full-time. So I started mowing lawns full-time. And then, what I started to do was to build up, and because I was very good at customer service. I'm always really fanatical about customers. I always wanted to turn out in time, do the best possible job. I was one of the first contractors in Australia to have a brush cutter. Before that was normal. Yeah, so because I liked the perfect edge, absolutely everything's going to be perfect, every blade of grass fixed, everything picked up clean. I have a system, actually, you can see it online, where you can mow grass that's like, 50 centimeters high and mow it clean with a catcher, even when it's wet. So I was good at that. So what I was starting to do is I picked up clients very easily, and I did that through leaflets and local papers and stuff. And then what I started to do was selling lawn mowing rounds. I just put a bunch of customers together and flogged them. And after a time, and I had some subbies on too, and I realized after a time I was making more money from selling lawn mowing rounds. So I made that my career. And then in 1988 or 1987, right about that time, VIP came in from Adelaide, and they were a franchise organization, and they were interstate and had all these uniforms and all this fancy stuff and brochures and things, and they terrified me. They really scared me. So I actually rang up the state manager at the time, David Mitchell, and I said to him, look, I don't want to compete with you guys. You're far too strong and successful for me, but I'll just help to build VIP up and give you all my clients at a good rate and stuff, and I'll help to build VIP. And so they said, well, no thanks. So I thought, okay, let's see what these guys are doing and if I can possibly do it better. So that year, that was 1988, I went to the franchising expo, and of course, I didn't have any uniform or anything. Like, we didn't have any uniforms in those days, but I went up to the stand, VIP stand, and I said, look, I'm interested in VIP. Can you tell me anything about it? And fortunately, I'm not a very good liar, so if you'd have asked me why I wanted to know, I said, well, I want to compete with you guys. But he didn't say that, actually. He didn't ask me, so he just gave me this information, gave me this brochure with all the information about how it worked. And then 15 minutes later, the state manager, Dave Mitchell, came in and kicked me off. That's Jim Penman. Don't tell him anything else.
Don't tell him anything. He's going to steal everything.
That's right. So I walked off the stand, and I was really excited because I thought, hang on, these guys have got something. There is a real benefit to the VIP system. I can see why. Say, if you're a lawn mowing contractor, if you get sick or you break your leg, you can lose your clients. But they can look after each other. And then they have common marketing and this kind of stuff. So I thought, hang on, but there's some benefits to this. But I reckon I can develop a system that will be better for the franchisee. That's how I thought about it. What system would I want to join if I was looking at getting into this business? So I went and I spent mostly the next 9 months arguing with lawyers because they kept on trying to do contracts that would they said, you're being too nice. You've got to give yourself more flexibility, meaning more power. And I said, no, I want something that I want to join. It's so great. You had to be mad not to join it. So I eventually got a contract I was quite happy with. And then I went to a few people I was interested in coming across, and they said, well, what about this? My best subbies and people who bought lawn mowing runs from me. And I said, what do you think of this contract? And they said, well, it's good, but what about this and this and this and this and this? And I said, I change it. So they basically helped me design the contract. And then I launched my franchise, which was about in June 1989. And somebody asked me at the time, they said, Jim, what do you think this thing's going to do? How successful could it be? And I said, well, I really don't know. But because, I didn't have any money or anything like that. But I said, well, look, if it's really successful, one day we could have as many as 100 franchisees. Oh, that would be exciting.
And your mind was blown.
Well, that's what I thought, because VIP had 250, so I thought if I could just hold my line against them. But what really shocked me was that it started blowing up really big. When it started off, they actually had this contract with Jim's Mowing Victoria and Jim's Mowing Australia. And I said, what's that for? I said, in case you want to go interstate. And I said, don't be stupid. This is a lawn mowing business. It's got to go interstate. So and then by the end of the first year, I had 60 franchisees, and people were coming interstate to me, and Victorians were going interstate too. So it kind of just amazed me.
How did that even happen? How did you go from trying to chase your first franchisee to all of a sudden overnight? Well, how long? Over a space of a year, you got about 60. Was it that you just said? How did that even happen?
Well, people were they just liked the system. See, what would happen, the way it would work is this, because it was me and VIP, nobody else in those days.
Yeah.
So everybody, obviously there's two, you go and have a look at both of them. Now, here's VIP with a really fancy office in South Melbourne, and here's me working out of a flat and in my basement. And so they used to say, why would you buy a business from somebody working from their basement? And it was very primitive, but what would happen actually, now, the way it worked is when I was selling lawn mowing rounds, what I used to do was I would do everything possible to make that person successful. And I would not only give them good advice, I'd even advise them to go and buy another business if that was a better deal for them. I'd give them a brochure about how to make, before that I sold them anything. That's how I used to sell. I used to sell by what we call selling by not selling. So I would tell them to, I would show them all the things they could do to build their own business and how to market and everything. And then after they'd signed, I would still give them help and advice and support and invite them to free lunches and help them if they wanted to sell, all kinds of things. I used to look after them really well. And then what I used to do was I put their number in black text and their phone number on a bit of white card, and I stuck it behind me on my office wall. And then if anybody was interested in the business, I would say to them, well, look, if you want to know anything about me, just ring some of those guys and ask them. And they'd ring up and they'd say, what's Jim like? And he's fantastic. He does everything he says. He keeps to his word. He's always helpful, always gives. And there was no fees involved. I just used to help them. So he's a great guy to do business with. So they used to sell the business for me. So when I started franchising, I had the same approach. What I used to do was to print out a list of all the franchisees with their phone numbers. And I give it to them. And people would say to me, why would I buy from you? You're from the basement. You're littler. You're not as successful as VIP. Why would I buy from you? And I said, well, there's some differences in the system. And I explained that. But I said, the main thing is this. Take this list and go and ring my franchisees. Just ring them and ask them, what's Jim like? What's it like? Why did you join? Would you make the same decision again? And then, and this is a bit sneaky, I'd say, go to VIP and get their list. And because I knew they wouldn't give it, you see. They couldn't give it because their people weren't as happy as mine. And so it wasn't me that sold it. It was my franchisees that sold it. And that's what happened. Went to a franchise expo that year. It was just me by myself in this green, jungle green, just in my normal uniform. And people were lined up the whole days of all they lined up 3 deep around my stand just talking to me. I got completely hoarse. So,
that is brilliant. Were you still wearing a hat as well all the time as well at those expos?
Not at the expo, but I had the beard. I looked like myself in those days. I had the Jim's green stuff on and stuff. But it's funny, it was really, really weird because I had no idea about becoming a household name. You'd have to think this was way outside my idea of vision. And people used to start to recognize me after a while. I remember once going to a butcher shop in the early days, and the butcher said to me, "G'day, Jim." And I said, "Oh, g'day." He said, "Your name's not really Jim, is it?" And I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, it is." And he said, "You even look like him."
Man, I'm telling you, you've just become an icon everywhere. Everywhere we look, it's just Jim something, and it's amazing that you've done it. It's crazy. Like, when did you said that you never really had that vision to become that? It just kind of happened. When did it all start coming into play? Where you're like, actually, well, this is actually becoming much bigger than what I expected. And then, how did you even go from this to offering more services other than just mowing?
Well, there was never any particular stage. I always underestimated my business. I mean, I very nearly sold out in the first year or two to somebody else. I just did. I actually got a certain stage. You know what convinced me more than anything else not to is not so much that I thought this vast empire was going to happen, but because the franchisees, when they heard about it, they said, "No, don't go. We trust you. We want you to be in place. We trust you to look after us." So that was.
Oh.
I was very close to doing something. And also I had a very messy divorce in 1992, and my ex-wife was really going for money and stuff, and it was so hard. So it was kind of, but gradually, only gradually over the years that I started to see. Now this is going to completely blow my reputation as a far-sighted business owner. How did I start doing other businesses? Well, I'd like to say it was because I saw the potential of the brand. It was nothing of the sort. I actually saw the potential for doing other services with our system, but I thought, hang on a bit, Jim's cleaning is ridiculous. This is a guy with a beard and a hat. Now, come on, that is a gardening image. What if it's a woman? How on earth would you want to wear my ugly face with a beard and a hat? Gardener to do with cleaning. So I started, okay, let's try the Jim's contracts and systems, but we'll use Sunlight, Sunlit. And I did this little logo with sprays and stuff, like that kind of thing. So it looked clean and fresh. And I sold a couple of franchises, and it was hopeless. Absolutely couldn't get any response, no good. Eventually I gave the people who were there, I said, here's your money back. I can't help you. It's just not working. Okay. A little while later, somebody came to me and said, I want to start Jim's Cleaning. I said, no, you don't. Jim's Cleaning will not work because it's a gardening image, a gardening guy, which is me. And I used to wear the jungle greens all the time. So they came to me and said, no, we think it will work. And I said, no, it won't work. And they said, we're so convinced it'll work that we'll take the initiative and we'll start it up. We just license your brands and your systems. So I said, oh, all right, okay, have a go. It's not your funeral. And they would describe to me how somebody would go to a estate agent and they say, we're from Jim's Cleaning, and they go, oh, Jim's Cleaning, like the mowing. That's great. Yeah, sure. We'll give you a go. So the logo worked, even though I didn't think it would.
Yeah.
And
And then from there, it obviously just took off.
well,
Was
most divisions actually, we did start trying to few ourselves, but most divisions actually happen because somebody comes to me. It's an extremely passive form of marketing. Great
wow.
majority of divisions.
So your intention was never to obviously get into almost every industry. It
No,
was
not
nothing
really.
like that. Even I've seen you've done Jim's real estate. How did that one play out? Did someone come?
Um, yeah, the same thing. Somebody came to us. They would like to try Jim's real estate. We actually had to check it by the franchisors because they were I was a bit concerned that it would hurt because we do work with a lot of real estate agents and stuff. So that was always a concern. But yeah, actually that's not going so well right now. We've only got a couple of franchisees. Not everything works. We've got some great divisions, but like for example, cleaning. Obviously, they've got like 800 now in their clean divisions, and test and tag's got 180 plus. They're great. Fencing is great. Pool care, dog wash is really going gangbusters. They're going fantastically. So, but other ones, just haven't gone quite so well. Mostly it depends on the leadership. If you've got a great leader, like people like Sharon or Hader, they're just fantastic people. They're inspirational. I'm in awe of these guys. They're far better than me. They're just great at what they do. So
And well,
yeah.
and that was actually leading to my next question. Like, what are the key indicators of success for number one yourself, but also for franchisees? What are those key ingredients that you look for in them, and obviously for yourself?
Well, one of the things that I did radically from the beginning was that I was quite selective with my franchisees. Before I put anybody, because I knew from selling lawn mowing grounds that if they didn't have good customer service, they would likely fail. And I know that because I remember talking to one of my trainers one time, and he asked me what happened to so and so and so. I mentioned a couple of guys because before I used to, when the training we had in those days was before they started, I would actually have them go out on the road with one of my successful guys, the best ones, and just to show them the ropes. It wasn't screening. It was just a bit of training. Very much less than what we do now. We do days on the road plus 5 days of formal training, all the rest of it. So it's 6 days, a lot more elaborate. But in those days, and then I remember talking to one of these trainers once, and he said to me, "Look, what happened?" He asked me, "What happened to these guys?" Mentioned 2 names, and I said, "Well, they both failed within 6 months." He said, "I thought so." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because they didn't have a great attitude towards customer service. So I didn't think they'd do very well." So when I started franchising, I didn't want my franchisees to fail. That was the biggest thing I had in mind. Everything I'd done with the system was designed to make them successful. But I knew that if they hadn't had the right attitude towards customer service, they'd likely fail. So I actually used to screen them. I used to send them out on the road with 2 of my top people. And then I get a report back and I say, "What do you think of them?" And I'd interview them myself too. Is there anything wrong? Slack customer service, don't want to listen. We wouldn't take them, which was different because VIP would take anybody. And I'm not blasting them. There's always been their policy. It still is. And
Yeah.
most service franchises are like that. But McDonald's, for example, is very selective. And I was determined to be selective and take people that I was convinced would succeed. I'm not always right, mind you, but we certainly try very hard. When I do franchise or training, the first hour and a half is from me, and I talk about selection, why it's so important, the ethics of selection, the ways of selection, why it helps your business, why it's terrible to put somebody who's going to fail. So I was very selective from the beginning, looking for people who were passionate about customer service. So that was a large part of it. And then look, being successful, to me, it's more about service. You just got to look after people at every level. I'm less focused on marketing than almost anybody else. I want my franchisees to be really, really, really happy and successful. I want my franchisors to be successful. I want my clients to give great service, and always pushing service. And if you do that, the marketing tends to take care of itself. We spend less on marketing now than we ever have. proportionally speaking, it's gone down. We've actually, in some regions, we've actually had to give back the money to the franchisees because we say, we can't spend it, guys. There's too much work coming in. They're busy all the year round, particularly in divisions like mowing and fencing. So we give the money back to them, and because we can't spend it. And that's happened because as our levels of services improve because of things like complaints monitoring and surveying and so forth, you don't need to market. You just get busy and busy. Something close to 30% of our leads are unserviced. We just can't cope with the volume.
Really?
Despite the fact that we're not big marketers at all. We really don't spend an awful lot of money on marketing, but it's about 28%, I think, last figures unserviced. It's horrifying. But
the brand literally just projectifies, and that was actually going into my next question.
But the brand is based on the experience of the customers. It's not the brand as such. It's the experience they have when they contact us and they get people to come back. It's quite astonishing, actually, when I get complaints. I personally deal with complaints. I personally read through every pause survey every day. If a customer has a problem that isn't fixed with the first complaint, it comes to me personally, and I will deal with it. I'm really, really intensely involved in driving customer service. So that's the experience that matters. If people use us and they have great experience, then they'll come back. I remember yesterday there was a complaint, really bad complaint about the terrible jobs done. And the franchisee wrote to me and he said, but it wasn't me. They got cheap as chips. As I always do, and I say, well, I'll teach them to use a lousy service just because they're cheap.
That's brilliant. And honestly, it's amazing because I've also read that Jeff Bezos still obviously does the same thing. He'll still deal with complaints, and that's his number one driver. So there's something in there that I think people should be following.
Well, people find it amazing. I spend so much of my time doing things that people would think is very petty. I mean, why do I give my phone number and my email to every franchisee in the system? Well, it's partly because I want to be available to help them if they've got any issues, but it's also because it helps me to know what's going on. Why are they not happy? What's bugging them? Where do they need help with? We actually have a system in gyms where the franchisees can vote out their franchisors. It's unique in the world of franchising. And that normally happens with the contact. They contact me and they say, franchisor's not looking after me. He's not nice. He's abrasive. He's rude. He's not helpful. And we do a survey of an anonymous, confidential survey of all the franchisees. There's a pause to it. If in 30 days the results come back negative, the franchisor's put on warning. He's got 3 months to get their confidence back. If not, he's gone. Now, it's not a confiscation. It's a forced sale. But nobody in the world does that. Our franchisees can move regions. They can move to another franchisor if they're not happy. Their franchisor has no say. And this applies to me too, by the way. I've got franchisors in regions that I own. They can kick me out. They can vote me out. They can move from my region.
They can get rid of the man, Jim, if they're not feeling it, which is, I think, it's very good.
What would happen if that happened was I would just get rid of the manager, of course.
Yeah. But at least it shows that everyone's replaceable within the business and no one's safe. So it's all about keeping up the customer service and keeping up that level of service that's going to obviously project the business. So that's amazing. And going into you saying that you don't even market yourself, or you still do, but not as crazy as you did. How did you market yourself? Like, what's the difference in marketing? What's really changed from back then to now? And how did you market to get franchisees? Was it all literally a lot of it word of mouth as your service went on?
No, we'd advertise. Like with businesses for sale and so forth in the early days. Look, everything's changed dramatically. It was an easy life back in the early days because basically you want to find lawn mowing clients. What do? You do leaflet drops. They worked less and less with time. Local papers work quite well, and then yellow pages. Once you got to be, big enough. So those were our methods, and that was pretty simple, and it was the same for a very comfortable life. And then this thing called the internet comes along, and that really stuffs everything up because everything changes from day to day. Today it's Google AdWords, tomorrow it's Facebook, and then you got Snapchat, and you want it's a wildly changing environment. But you just got to change with it. And I usually find it quite bewildering. I'm not really much of a fan of social media myself. I never use it, but you just got to learn that. And we've got some great people.
So was it one of those things that did you at first demonize the internet and all the new ways of marketing, or were
No,
you
no,
always,
no.
okay, this is the way of the world and this is how I have to adapt?
One of the great things about a franchise system is that it's not centrally controlled. Our franchisors control their own advertising. It's in the contract. There's no central, everything comes to Jim and we spend it. Each franchisor is responsible. He collects the money from his own or her own franchisees and spends it in their interest locally. Now, they can join together in larger groups to do things like yellow pages and stuff, but essentially the franchisors control it. So what you've got is you've got 50 plus divisions, and you've got something like 300 or 400 franchisors. Some of them are doubled up, of course. Um, they all do their own marketing. So what you're getting is a vast number of people who are trying different things, and when something works, they get back to you. So we'll do an interview with a successful franchisor. We do this all the time, and we'll ask them what they're doing and how they're marketing and how they're selling and stuff, and then that's released to the other franchisors. We've got dozens of these things. So the best people are just incredibly good at what they do.
Okay, and going in, how do you see us going forward? Do you think the franchise model is going to be here to stay, or do you think in the future it's going to change? How do you see the next 10, 20 years playing out with the models?
Franchising is powerful. It's good. The look. I mean, I'm not boasting, but this is pretty simple statistics. If you look, and you can check this out online, if you look at the businesses like cleaning and gardening, which are very low level service businesses, failure rate in the first year is around about 90 to 95%, depending on exactly where you look. And if you looked at there's an American association called the Cleaning Janitorial, so something like that. If you look at their website, estimates 95% fail in their first year. Okay, our failure rate, what we call a failure rate, is around about 10.5%, about 10.5%, around about that figure. Okay, so it's slightly different. Now, what makes it even more impressive is that what we call a failure is somebody who's no longer a franchisee, which means somebody who has, but that could be because they got offered a brilliant job in their old business, or because they went independent, for example. That's still off the system. So you look at the relative success of getting into business with gyms and independent, it kills it, because we're so good at what we do, because we give plenty of work, and because we also charge higher prices. We tell our franchisees to charge 10% more than the going rate. Always, never, never, never cheapest chips. I even use the word cheapest chips to say, don't do that. Charge a lot. Charge high. Find out what everybody else is charging independent and add 10%. And our fees average about 8%. So it's more than enough to cover your fees. So charge more. And we actually have a system where we rate surveys that come back. And one of the things we rate is what proportion of surveys are knocked back on price. So, for example, if you've got a new guy who's really struggling to get jobs and really short of jobs, and he's got $3 signs, which means he's in the most expensive third, we'll say, look, consider moderating your prices. But if you've got a very successful guy who's flat out got great rating and he's got $1 sign, I will say to him, put your prices up at least 10%, try it, maybe 20%. So we're always about quality service, great price. So we push and push that, and that's what works. There's so much demand for great service. People think the price is the issue. It's not. You don't need the people who only want to be cheap. Let them go to cheapest chips. Let them
Let
go
them
to
go,
high pages.
let them go to the cheap. But
Yeah,
it's true. Like I've used you guys for my real estate work. I know a lot of the cleaning work, and I think a lot of the gardening work goes through you guys, and we've never had a problem. It's just a
thank you.
franchise thing. I'm not too sure which one it is, and his details are up on our tradesman's list, and we keep using him because it's just the level of service, and that's what people said.
Look, sometimes our service is on the whole very good, but it's not always the case. But the thing about it is that if a survey comes back with a complaint or something bad, because they're not happy with the job, what actually happens is the franchisor gets involved. What we want the franchisee to go back and fix the job, and then get evidence that the client is happy, and then we'll remove it. So there's a lot of pressure in that. If they get too many complaints, they get warning letters and breach notices, and they can be terminated. So it's a very serious issue with us if you get too many complaints. So we're always pushing for better service. But we also have a system too called a warranty fund. And what that means is that if a franchisee does something wrong by a client, obviously the franchisee should fix it. But if the franchisee has gone from the system then we take responsibility for fixing the problem, no matter what it is. We had one fencing job that was $120,000, which we paid to fix because it was poorly done. And it wasn't obvious until years afterwards. It was like 4 years after it was built. This fence wasn't properly done. The nails weren't in quite thick enough. Whatever the reason, we replaced the whole fence. So there's no question. Any client gets any job done. Somebody pays money for a job that isn't finished, bang. We had one franchisee who actually basically defrauded clients. They actually took money and they just did a whole lot of money from clients and didn't do the job. Now, we paid all that money back to the clients. We're now pursuing that guy legally, which may or may not work. But the fact is the clients got every cent back.
The clients come first, and you just make sure that they're happy, so then they'll obviously come back. And that's pretty much what you're telling me is the clients come first, the franchisees come first. Just service.
I'd actually say in our case, my franchisees come first. If you look at the email that I sent you, down at the bottom is a little three-part thing. Our first priority is the welfare of our franchisees. We are also passionate about customers. We sign only franchisees and franchisors we are convinced will succeed. Franchisees to me are number one because in practice, we have far more work than we can handle, way over more work. So the key thing is, how do I get my franchisees happy? I don't mind if a client gets upset about being overcharged. They get some really blistering comments about the fact that we're treble what somebody else is. I don't care. That's not negative. What I want to see is great service, and you can charge as much as you like. And I tell them again and again, charge good prices. Don't be cheap. But by jeepers, you make that customer into a raving fan.
Okay, wow, that's it's very interesting. I really like that. I didn't think of it like that, but even in the sense of just for some advice, even for myself, I've been even thinking about starting to franchise. I still think I'm probably a couple years off in a sense, but just some advice for myself, like in regards to franchising. What's some do's and don'ts about it, really?
Put yourself on the other side of the desk. What would appeal to you if you were going to be a franchisee? Think of everything from their point of view. The whole secret of franchises is to attract and keep quality franchisees. Now, if you ever look at franchises around the system, you want to look at somebody good, look at McDonald's. McDonald's is a great franchise system. It is awful food. It is unhealthy as anything. But as a franchise system, they are absolutely brilliant. And if you read about what Ray Kroc did and how he did it, it was all about making its franchisees successful. And they're still good. They still listen. You know, all this McCafe thing that they're doing now across Australia, that was all worked out with the franchisees. They worked it out together, and they decided they wanted to do it. So McDonald's they have suppliers, and they have to use suppliers, but they don't make margin out of suppliers. They have the best quality stuff, so they're great. Now, if you want to look at the other extreme, look at Retail Food Group and what they've done. And this is people like Domino's and stuff and Brumbies and stuff. These people are absolute. I don't want to say what I think of them, but the franchisors are dreadful. What they've done is they make people buy supplies for double the price they can get them from Coles, and they're not even well delivered. They're not even good service. They force them to sell pizzas for $5, which is below their cost, and the franchisors get paid by turnover, so they're happy with that. But this poor sod of a franchisee is working 80 hours a week trying to make a living, and they're selling below cost. How is that fair? They make them do some massive rechange of the system. They got no say in that. I mean, they just treat them like dirt. And what's happened is they've taken over these great brands, and they have slaughtered them. They've killed them, and their numbers are just going down like a rock. They are dreadful, immoral, stupid people. They've destroyed what they've bought because they're only thinking about the bottom line. And I'd love to do Jim's Legal, actually. One thing, a division I'd like to get going. And if I could, I would actually prime people as franchisees ripped off by rotten franchisors.
Well, whoever's listening and wants to do Jim's Legal, hit Mr. Jim Penman.
Any lawyers out there? Yeah, you can look after people so much better. See, lawyers is an interesting thing too. Lawyers is something I'd love to do. You know why? Because look, we like to make fun of lawyers and stuff, and I know about really good lawyer jokes, and they're all bad. But the fact of the matter is, lawyers are two kinds of people. You have got some of the lawyers are the most decent, honourable, caring people in the world. I had a family court lawyer in my domestic disputes, and she was a lovely, lovely, decent human being. She would lie awake agonizing about the terrible problems I went through. I lost my kids for 2 years, and this kind of stuff. It was awful. And this lady was just a saint. And I've had my own in-house lawyer is a wonderful, wonderful, ethical, decent lady too. And she's got her own practice. But I tell you what, there are some absolute animals out there in terms of lawyers. Let me tell you about one case. I want to tell you about one particular case. This was a franchisee who had a fair good case for getting their money back. And they really had a good case. And they'd approached me, and I said to them, look, I'm sympathetic. I'll help you with this and organize it. Now, what they did instead, they went to see a lawyer, and the lawyer said, yeah, okay, all right. Now, let's sue the franchisor and let's sue Jim because he's got the big bucks. Now, this was a $35,000 business. Okay, $35,000 was the value of the business. So they came to me. Now, I have various ways of doing things. And one of the things I do is tend to force up the opposite, make it difficult for the other side, because that's how I fight legal cases. So as soon as they sue me, I say, okay, how can I make life difficult for you? Cost me virtually nothing. I would just write letters and all kinds of stuff. That's how I did it. And we came to mediation, which I did long distance. They were up in Cairns or somewhere. And by the way, it wasn't the franchisee. It was she died, and the husband was trying to get the money back for the kids and stuff like this. So we had a mediation, and we settled at mediation. I actually got the franchisor to give the money back, and I stuck in $5,000. That's a $40,000 payout. Now, this was settled at mediation. No court involved, no legal cases, no barristers, nothing. You know what their legal bill was? $100,000. This is for a $35,000 claim. Their lawyer settled at mediation rang up $100,000. Now, what kind of psychopath would do a thing like that? Why didn't they go to the client and say, this is not going to work? Because you know perfectly well, when you settle a case, even if you win the case in court, you'll never get all your costs back. It's always in proportion. So they were never, ever, ever, there was no conceivable way this particular case could ever have made them money.
Wow.
And that was, look, I know I was partly responsible, but I was just so appalled at what this whole thing was. I thought, you know, maybe they'd spent $5,000 or $10,000, but $100,000.
Yeah, there was
what would the court case have cost? By the way, in the whole history of Jim's Group, I've been to court 2 times ever with nearly 4,000 franchisees and multi-million-dollar business all over the place for my franchisors. I've been to court twice, and in both cases, I settled at mediation for what I offered them in the first place before they spent their first cent.
So that just comes down to obviously just being a good person, and obviously looking after them. Did you ever go onto that? You hear it a bit that you work for them, they don't work for you type of thing. Was that kind of your motto? Yeah.
So we kind of envisage as our franchisees are our clients, their ultimate clients. We work for them. And I say to them, I'm not your boss. You're my client. I've got to keep you happy. You know, the only way we actually measure franchisors officially, and we have awards every year that go out. We can have a gold, a platinum, or a diamond award. There's only one way to get an award, and that's based on the franchisee survey that we do, anonymous, confidential survey every year. And we ask questions like, how often do they ring you? How quickly they get back to you? And there's various options. And how helpful are they? And according to the answers, you get an award. Or if you get patted, you get a breach notice. So
that's crazy. How many times?
The top award is the diamond, and we didn't even have it until about 3 years ago because we didn't think anybody could do that well. We had to develop a new category of award because people were doing so well.
Wow! And how many surveys are going out for these clients? How do you structure that?
So every client gets a survey, and about 1 in 3 will respond, which is great.
Okay, and then from there, obviously, it just builds, and that's how you categorize, obviously, where people sit.
But that's a client survey, which is one thing. The franchisee survey is to the franchisees, which is actually, in our way, we think more important because we're a lot more short of franchisees than we are of clients.
how do you structure that? Is that sent out once a month or once a year? How does that work?
The franchisee survey goes out once a year.
Yep.
The client survey goes out. I think it's 10 days after the job's gone out. We just ask them
All
how
right.
they went. And the
All
great
right.
majority, our average star rating is about 4.6 out of 5.
Okay, wow, that's insane. And do you feel like just because of these surveys, well, obviously it's measured so much of your success, but have you, for anyone that's actually considering starting their own business or brand or whatever it is, what tips would you give them? Um, like what stands out to you for a lot of people that are scared or like a bit on the fence of what they should do?
Um, start, Focus on your customers. I mean, overwhelmingly to me, customers are what matter. Now, if you're in a business yourself, it's the customers you get money from. If it's you're in a franchise, your franchisees are your primary customers, but everybody else is a customer too. So just be focused on making. Um, my latest version of my book is called Every Customer a Fan. And that's my basic philosophy. And if you do that, you actually find you don't need to market so much because people will come to you. I mean, most of our franchisees actually don't take much work. We've got franchisees who've been in system for years and haven't taken a job for years because they get so much work from referrals and repeats and everything else. So just look after your customers and think long term. Always think long term. Like if you there's a lot of different things that I could do in business that would make me a lot of money short term. Just as an example, if I terminate a franchisor, okay, legally speaking, they're terminated. They can take their money. They can just take their business and sell it to somebody else. But we never do that. We always sell it and give them the money. That's just how we do it.
Yeah. Wow. And I read your open letter to Mr.
Mm.
Daniel Andrews, and I 110% agree with everything that you wrote.
Thank you.
Um, two things: did he respond? And if he didn't respond, and just what are your whole thoughts on the COVID situation? That obviously, I know you went into it. So anyone that didn't read your letter, maybe just explain to what you wrote, and yeah, what are your whole thoughts on the
Okay.
situation? So
Look,
sad
look,
with
look, I'm very focused on one issue. In the original regulations sent out by the Department of Health and Human Services, it's a quite an elaborate document, about 5 pages. But right at the top of it, there was a statement that said, um, regardless of the above, a sole operator working alone on a site is fine to continue. Now, that is the law of the land as Victoria, as put out. This is the best expert advice given out by people who obviously studied this thing for weeks. This has been set up in advance. It was extremely elaborate. Okay, so that was there. At a news conference the following week, the Premier got up and he said, well, obviously you can't get your lawns mowed or your carpets, your house cleaned under stage 4. Now, that is not what his own regulations said. Not at all. They said that it was okay if you were by yourself. But of course, so what I said, now I was a little bit naive because what I said to Channel 7 was I said in effect that because I've had legal advice, what the department says is the law of the land, and we'll obey the law of the land. If anybody gets fined for doing what the Premier says, that's not legal, and we'll challenge that and we'll pay their fine. Now, what that came out as, that was carefully edited down to a soundbite in which basically it seemed that I was telling people not to pay the fine, disobey the law. I didn't say that. I never said it, and that caused a bit of a ruckus, quite a bit of negative. So then I actually started writing these letters, and what I basically said to him is that you had perfectly good expert advice that a sole operator working alone with no contact with a client or with any other workers is exceptionally safe. You yourself changed the rules, okay? Why did you do that? Where was your expert advice? Why have you overridden the advice of your own department, which said it's safe? Um, why, if it's so dangerous to be doing lawn mowing and gardening and so forth, why is it that council workers in groups can do things that individuals can't? Why does belonging to a union, not that I put it that way, give you immunity to the virus? It's completely hypocritical. It's two standards. If you belong to an established union and then you can work, If you're self-employed, you can't. Even though by any reasonable standards, a sole operator working alone is far less dangerous to themselves and the public. I think it's just completely outrageous. The Premier basically has... Look, what happened, I'm clear. I'm quite sure what happened is the regulations were sent out. The Premier got into a news conference. He didn't know his own regulations, which are quite complicated. He just wasn't aware of it. So he made this off-the-cuff comment about gardening and cleaning, not knowing his own regulations. And then he was faced with an issue. He said, okay, I've got two things. First of all, I could say, look, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, and actually, in fact, it's okay for tolerate. But that could be embarrass me politically. The other option is I could make this the law of the land, change the regulations, and throw tens of thousands of Victorians out of work into misery and unemployment and want and everything else. Easy solution for someone like Dan Andrews. Of course, a few tens of thousands of Victorians. Ha! Come on. What do they matter? Me as a politician, my ego, far more important. So that's what he did. They changed the regulations. And he, at the conference on the 13th, and this is my letter coming out, it's going to come out the next day or two. I'm actually going to say to him, the conference on the 13th, you said, I will not make changes that overcome the expert advice that I've been given. And my question at the Premier is, why did you do that yourself? You overcame your own expert advice. Your own experts told you, our people, and I'm not talking about gyms, I'm talking about tens of thousands of sole operators. Your own expert advice said that we are not a danger of infection. Why did you disregard that? Why? What expert advice have you got that we're any kind of a threat? Because I've never heard of anybody having a virus infection in that thing. And why is it the council workers can do the jobs that our people can't? And I'm just going to keep on asking that question. And the media's been very supportive lately, actually. And 90%, 95% of the response has been very positive. People stop me in the street and they say, I'm wearing a mask. I must say we always obey the law. They stop me in the streets and they say, good on you, Jim. Thanks for standing up for us, because you're speaking to people who've got no voice. Yeah, look, the unionized workers, they got the unions. Big companies have got their lobbyists and $1,000 a plate dinners and stuff. Who speaks up for the little guy, the self-employed cleaner or gardener or pool cleaner or handyman? Who speaks up for them? Nobody. And that's what I'm trying to do.
It's true. And how do you think Australia's economy will be after this pandemic? If and obviously when the restrictions are lifted, I know it's a hard one to answer, but what's your opinion with how it's all going to play out?
Oh, it's bad. It's bad, bad, bad. I feel so sorry. Look, I'm personally in a fairly comfortable position financially. My goodness, it hardly dips out. But you hear the stories, not just from our people, but from independents too, that the hurt, the suffering that goes on. I mean, I've got my franchisors. As soon as our guys were told they couldn't work, we obeyed the law. We said, stop working. We actually suspended their fees. So they're not legally speaking franchisees. But said, if you can do NDIS or anything, go and do it with our blessing. We're not going to stop you making a living. But even with that, we've suspended all their fees. All the franchisors are not paying getting any income. The franchisors are still ringing the franchisees regularly, even more than usual, because of the mental health issues, the stresses, the depression, the dreadful things that are going on. Andrews has no concept of this. He is sitting there in his comfortable little bubble in Spring Street with all his well-heeled professionals and inner urban elites and stuff. They have no idea what people are going through out there. It's appalling what they've done. The callous disregard for human welfare is just dreadful. Just because Plummer doesn't vote for you, doesn't support you with their union dues, doesn't mean to say they're not human beings. They're still Victorians. What he's done has been shocking.
Yeah, and it's scary. Obviously, JobKeeper, job seeker gets reduced in September. Banks have frozen mortgages till the end of December. Then March, they're going to be well. Who knows if they're going to extend it after March? I feel like there's going to be a lot of damage that's gonna occur. Like it's weird.
It will take us years to recover from this, if ever. And the other thing, too, is that the relationship with China is going bad, so that's going to have an effect on the economy. I don't think we'll ever go back to the good old days of 1819, not for a long time, if ever.
Yeah, because you look at you look at the real estate industry at the moment, and now there's not a lot of stock, but the stock that's actually coming onto the market, if it's good stock, it's actually still flying out the door and still getting good prices. But a lot of the stuff's just still hanging around, so it's hard to really get a gauge because. like I feel, I don't know if this is just artificial at the moment because there's so much support from the banks and the governments, and that's kind of why it's still holding everything up. Like, how do you compare this at the moment to, for example, a recession that we went through in the 90s? Is it like, I've spoken to some older guys, and they've all, even a client of mine, he's 95, and he's been giving me the rundown of his whole life. And what he kind of said was, this doesn't really feel like we're in a recession, but it doesn't really feel like it's. Is that because we're just in an artificial bubble at the moment, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the strange thing about it is we had the same thing in the GFC, so called, and even more so in this. We've actually found our leads have gone up dramatically. So the actual amount of work out there is higher. It's substantial, like up about 20% since last year. Apart from specific lockdowns, like things like our building inspections has a bit of a slump and so forth because properties. But basically, the leads have gone up quite dramatically. But what's more important from our point of view is that actually franchise inquiries have gone through the roof. We're actually getting, apart from the lockdown situation, our growth is extraordinary. We're growing faster now than we have for many, many years. In fact, the last period that was as good as that was back in the 90s, when in the Keating recession. And like, we grew from 1,000 to 1,400 in a single year. So this is, I mean, look, I would not have this virus, and the effects are terrible. But from purely business point of view, it's actually we're big winners.
Wow. Okay.
I don't mean to seem callous about that. I just have to be realistic.
No, it's
We've
just,
got,
it's just
we've got
how
a
it
conference
is.
centre which is really hurting, and I feel for the people who are so badly impacted, the restaurant owners and all the rest of it, and the tourism. But home service is a great area to be.
Do you think it's because a lot of people are spending time at home? Do you reckon that's why, or it's just, that's interesting. What's next for Mr. Jim himself, and even just the whole Jim's group? What do we what do we see in the next 10, 20, 30 years with yourself? Like, what else do you still want to give to this legacy, this amazing legacy that you've already built? And where do you see Jim's group being? Like, where's the end goal?
There's no end goal. I mean, if there's an end goal, it's every single franchisee is wildly happy, and every client is wildly happy, and that's something we'll never achieve, but we'll keep on getting closer. The most exciting things going on around is to do with computer software. We are investing massively in, like, several $1 million a year in software development. For example, we've got a program called Jim's Jobs, which has been around for a long time, but we've been developing it to be a mobile system. And that's doing all kinds of stuff right now. We're going to have a system within a few weeks whereby when a client rings in or books online, rather than saying the franchisee will ring you back, what we can actually do for the people who are using this system is to say, okay, to the client, when would this afternoon between 2 and 4 suit you? Can we turn up then? Because what we'll do is we'll get access to their diaries, and they'll be able to tell us if they've got any time. We'll know where they are. We'll know when they're going to be the closest. And they will book it straight in. So the franchisee, all they do is they get a notice, and they just get another job booked automatically into their phone. It just goes into their mobile phone, so they can do it. And then we'll do other things too. Like, for example, one of the things we do now, sometimes clients get appointments wrong. We just set up a system whereby if an appointment's been set, it'll actually text it to the client. We'll do things like, if you can't get through to a client, it's just easy. You just press a button and they'll send a text to the client. We'll follow up messages. We'll have ways of chasing debts and so forth. We'll be able to dramatically improve the level of service to clients, reduce the level of complaints. And we'll also know if a franchisee doesn't ring back, because the system will tell us, hey, you haven't called back. And the franchise will ring up, hey, why aren't you ringing? What's happened? What's gone wrong? And it'll remind them they haven't called back. It'll remind them they haven't turned up to a job. So what software will do more than anything else, it will dramatically improve customer service, and it will also improve the income of our franchisees.
Okay, so that's pretty much what you've been focusing on. Is there anything really else that, apart from the tech, is there anything, I don't know, in the next 20, 30 years, is there anything else you want to achieve? Or do you feel like you've achieved absolutely everything, and now it's just
Oh
focusing.
no, 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 no. I'm just getting started. I mean, I'm supposed to be dead in 20 years or so, but I tell you what, I feel full of energy and fire. I just so excited. I mean, one of the most really wonderful things is my research program is actually going really, really well. I've got a fantastic guy, Nitin, who's the head of it, and one of my sons, who's got a neuroscience degree, is working on it, and a couple of other people, and we're starting some really brilliant experiments. And I, in the next 10 years, we could be changing the face of Western civilization. Some of the stuff that we're doing comes out of my research is revolutionary. We've found some really fascinating stuff. We've found that, for example, using pheromones, this is all done on rats, we can actually dramatically change behavior and attitudes. We can make rats into much better mothers, for example. We can make them more bold, less likely to get depressed and so forth. There's some really exciting things about how to treat mental illness and even things like poverty and so forth, and alcoholism and drug addiction. There's some very powerful stuff. This is the thing that excites me the most. I love my business. It's fun and I believe in it. And I really want to serve my franchisees. But ultimately, the opportunity to change the world in a fundamental way through science is what really drives me. It always has. It always will.
Is it? And does this go back to your point when you said you'd make enough money, you'd be able to
That's what it's
you'd be able.
about. Yep.
Wow. Okay. Just
And then I can afford to spend. I can afford to spend. It's $1 million a year this year. Next year it'll be $2 million, and I hope it'll be able to increase from then if my business succeeds more. And just pump basic research funding into one of these fundamental problems. I think that the changes in things like epigenetics, some of the recent scientific changes, which I keep abreast of, are incredibly exciting. They really could change human life for the better in a way that dwarfs the effects of the computer revolution. It's extraordinary, the potential, and people just don't see it. But there's all these implications. We've had some very, very interesting, exciting results so far, and watch this space. This will be world changing.
I'm extremely excited to see what you got planned. I had no idea about any of this. Like this is crazy. Can I ask, like, was this always what fueled you to build this mega business? And is that what got you going every single day? Like you tell me now that
Yes.
you've only just gotten started, I can see it in your eyes. Like you just want to eat things. Like this is,
Mm.
and that's still to this day wakes you up every morning and drives you.
Yes, yes. Well, look, even when I was mowing lawns and doing basic stuff, I was going off to Monash University to them in their biomed library and reading up on primate social behaviour. And I was writing. I used to get up 5 o'clock in the morning in front of the fire and the gas fire, and then just write and developed all kinds of stuff. Anybody wants to know about this stuff, by the way, just go to jims.net, meet Jim, and you'll see there's some videos there, and there's links to the books that I've written, which you can get very, very inexpensively. And this is. It's not widely accepted yet in the scientific world. It's completely revolutionary in terms of changes everything people think about history and economics, why poverty happens, why the Roman Empire collapsed, why it didn't collapse completely in the fourth. All kinds of things. It just has this totally different view of what's going on in the world, totally against thinking. But the really interesting thing about this thing I call biohistory is that it's actually testable in the laboratory. You can actually make a prediction from history, basically, and say, okay, if this is correct, you're going to get these results. For example, you look at animals like lemmings or varying hares or muskrats, which vary in population cycles in a particular way. Okay, my theory actually says that there's going to be an epigenetic change in the animals from different periods of the cycle, and these are the kind of changes you expect to see. I can actually implement them. I can actually say you expect this. This is a prediction. This thing about use of pheromones too, that came out of that theory. It came out of implications from that. It said, okay, pheromones should work this way, therefore that's why we do them. It's all based on my research.
Wow. When Well, one last question, a bit personal, but when you, for example, in the next 20, 30 years, when it's time to call it a day, in a sense, like what legacy do you want to be left as? How do you want to be known to everybody?
The scientific legacy is the most important one. I mean, I do believe in my business, and I think what it does is great, and I'm proud of the fact that we've helped so many thousands of people to have better lives. But ultimately, what biohistory could do would be extraordinary. And
It would,
one thing I've made it quite clear to my children is they're not going to get a heap of money. There's going to be no trust funds in gyms for my descendants. I will not maybe get them better help with buying a house, which these days you need to, but basically the money is going to go into the research foundation. And I'm very, very blessed and fortunate that one of my sons, Andrew, has a neuroscience degree and he's dedicated to this thing. And he's going to run research project indefinitely. And he's only 33, so he's got a long way to go. So that is what my life is about more than anything. And frankly, I don't think anything else by comparison matters nearly as much.
Wow, does that how does that make you feel that you got one of your sons in there spearheading it with you? Like, is it
Oh,
just
that is
unexplainable feeling?
the greatest relief, because in the past I knew if anything happened to me that would be the end of it. But now that Andrew is there, it's fantastic. It was such a burden off my mind. I mean, look, if I walked under a bus tomorrow, I know the research will continue. I totally trust in him. He's a very driven, brilliant young man, and he's gonna, he'll be walking down the aisle at Stockholm one of these days. There'll be a Nobel Prize for this, because if we can prove this, it'll be revolutionary in a way that, you're talking about something equivalent to relativity or origin of the species, evolution. I mean, it's massive. I've yet to prove it. But what we've come to realize is you can't persuade people because it's so unorthodox, so radical in its way of thinking. What you've got to do is to produce actual treatments that work. And I'm convinced we can do this. There are ways of making, basically the whole thing is about, the whole of economy, society is all based on character, on personality. And there's ways of changing it. And we're looking at a whole different ways of helping people using lots of different methods, not just things like microRNA and proteins and cytokines and pheromones and all kinds of different methods we're using. And we're looking at biosimilar drugs that might have the effect. We're having a whole range of different ways of making these kind of changes. And once you develop them, theory is very, very clear. This would have dramatic implications for the treatment of things like mental illness and addictions and so forth. And I think it'll spread. And once we start showing that there's billion-dollar drugs in this sort of thing and there's money to be made, people are going to start looking at my work and saying, well, this is interesting. I mean, I've got other things in the book too, actually. People are going to look back in years in the future and say, we were so stupid not to notice. One of the things that tells me is there's a way of, and I'll even tell you what it is. You want to know what's going to happen to the stock market, have a look at the level of cortisol in sewage. It's a cortisol
Really?
is a stress drug, and it should rise. The levels of cortisol in sewage should rise in the period before a recession takes place, and the higher it goes, the more likely recession comes. That's a prediction. It's there's billions of dollars in this, but nobody wants to look at it.
Wow. Okay, so how can I do more research? You got your books that you've written.
Yep.
Do you
If you
have
just
anything?
go on www.jims.net, meet Jim, you'll see all the biohistory stuff in there. You can actually see some videos, which Andrew did because he's very artistic as well as being a scientist. There's some great videos that explain it, and you can get links to the books. And the book's not hard to understand. It'll blow your mind because it's so different, but it's written in reasonably in plain English, and there's
Oh,
charts and
great.
everything.
I'm gonna check this out, and I'm really keen to follow this journey. How, are you? Do you speak about it much or not really?
Oh, I speak it when I can. There was a bit of a fuss when the books came out, and they haven't done too bad, but I haven't cracked the scientific establishment, to put it mildly.
So it's all
No,
hearsay until we crack it.
revolutionaries, yeah, don't always get on. Look at Gregor Mendel, okay, back in the monk with his peas. I mean, he wasn't even known in his lifetime, and now he's Mendelian genetics is the thing. I firmly believe this is the same issue, that eventually we'll prove it. If not me, my son will do it. My research foundation will do it, because I'm sure I'm right. I just not in detail, but in the overall idea, and we can dramatically change the whole world in a way that people have no understanding, no imagination. You look at problems like Aboriginal disadvantage. It'll be simple. You're talking about something like equivalent to a vaccination campaign. It would cost a tiny rounding error fraction, and you could help people to live much better lives. Addiction is a terrible problem.
Yeah.
It's to my mind, it's probably quite easily solvable, and not by anything complicated, not by trillions of dollars, just by very moderate things where you just give people a treatment, of pheromones, injections, something that'll have this effect, that'll help them to be more disciplined, more restrained, that'll think long term, these kinds of things. It's all based in the science of what's called a slow life history strategy and these kind of things too. But it's that's the idea. If we can produce the experiments, we can show that there's stuff in this, and people will start to, the billionaires will start to jump on board and say, "Hey, there's money in this."
That's
Well, good.
crazy. That's honestly amazing. It seems like you got a whole lot way to go to literally leave it. You've left. I feel already a massive legacy, but to yourself, there's just something that this you haven't even started. You haven't
No,
even started,
no.
and
This
it's
this
and
this is
what
a,
you
this is a this is a toehold in. We're just starting off, and what's
this
going to happen over the next decade will be vastly greater. One time you'll take this interview and you'll say, "Hey, I interviewed that guy back before biohistory was known."
I definitely can't wait. I will be following your progress because I think it's from what you've told me, it sounds amazing if you can crack the Da Vinci Code, and from there it will literally change the life of millions of people. Which these are problems that we're facing daily: addiction, mental health, mental illness.
Mm.
It's crazy. Like Jim, I think I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for jumping on with me today. It's been an absolute pleasure to understand your story, and I believe people are going to get so much value out of this. I got so much value out of this, and yeah, if anybody that's interested, follow Mr. Jim Penman on his social media platforms. And yeah, I really will be following your progress with your new venture, and I wish you the best of luck with everything.
Thanks, Christian. Good to talk to you.
Have a really good day.